Thank you. Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for coming along tonight, and congratulations to those who have done so. It's good to see a good little group of people who are passionate about this issue, and I know that the one thing about this issue is that for every one or two people who will actually turn up in person to a meeting, there are tens, hundreds, thousands in the online world who are, of course, very committed and very passionate, and who just may not actually come out to the real-life meeting in this type of environment. But I know that those working the campaigns, working to try to stop this policy measure from coming through, will of course be doing all they can to engage people through every possible forum, but especially, of course, through the forum of modern media that this policy measure is so focused on. Politics has a nasty trend sometimes, and that is that it has a capacity to see who can save things the most. Those like to campaign on environmental issues and see who can save the environment the most. Those who like to campaign on other social issues to see who can sort of save people who might be disadvantaged in some way or other the most. Or indeed those who like to campaign on moral issues and to see who can save the children the most. And the advent of this policy is in some ways one of those campaigns of who can save the children the most. There's no doubt that all sides of politics stand quite clearly in a position of saying that they want to help families, help parents, attempt to provide a safe usage environment for the internet, and the genesis of this policy was, I think, very much a case of one-upmanship leading into the last election. That the Howard government had made it an issue to a degree about safe online environments, had campaigned on it, and in doing so had put in place a number of policy measures, one of which was, of course, a range of free filters that could be downloaded by families. Now, I'm not saying that proved to be a spectacularly successful policy measure. In fact, one of the interesting things about that is how few people actually took up that policy measure, which I think shows you that perhaps out there in the real world, mums and dads sitting at home weren't so convinced that those filters were going to work, and I suspect probably are no more convinced that the Rudd government's filters will work. But nonetheless, the Rudd government, or the Rudd opposition at that stage, in the game of one-upmanship leading up to an election, said, well, voluntary filters won't do, we have to have compulsory filters. Since that time and since their election, and that coincided roughly with the time that I went into Parliament, I've tried to pursue this issue with Stephen Conroy as much as possible, and trying to get from him some clarity on what it is he's trying to filter and how he's trying to filter it. And we've reached a point now where we have a level of clarity around it, and I think in many ways the strongest arguments against this filter now are not entirely arguments about free speech. They're important, and they're certainly arguments that philosophically I hold dear, but the truth is the government appears to now be looking at a form of filtering that could end up being so narrow and specified in terms of the types of sites it's looking at, that it will end up being completely ineffective in terms of providing any safer environment on the internet for families and children than what currently exists anyway. And the one big risk that flows from that is that for families, for parents, it risks lulling them into a false sense of security, that they're told the internet will be filtered, that there's this mandatory filter there, but of course what it lets through will still be an environment where parents should be taking responsibility for their children's online usage themselves, because the environment itself still will not be safe. The environment will still require a high level of supervision, or will still require the use of other voluntary filters to be used in their own environments. So I think there are, of course, people who will come at this argument from all types of approaches, and certainly those who want to chase the philosophical argument that we shouldn't be filtering the net, that we shouldn't be, of course, taking any of these types of censorship approaches. I understand. Philosophically, I'm there with you in many ways. But I think practically, when it comes to defeating this, some of the key messages that need to be pushed through to politicians are about those that it just won't work. And it won't work because where there are filters, people find ways around them. Where, of course, the content that is filtered is defined to specific URLs, as the government seems to be proposing. So it won't be a filter that filters based on terms or content in a broad and sweeping way. And if it did that, I'd be very worried, because of course that would capture a whole lot of unintended consequences. But by filtering on specific URLs, as appears to be the proposal, it's never going to keep up with what's happening on the online world anyway, and will never manage to actually even effectively filter out the type of content that they claim they'll be filtering, let alone all of the other types of things that should be filtered in that type of environment. So it's going to be ineffective in a number of ways, and I think that big risk of trying to convince politicians is that it will lull parents and families into that potential false sense of security. Now, I've been fairly clear in my position on this. I know a number of my colleagues have been as well, from not just in the Liberal Party, but certainly in the minor parties. The Greens have taken a fairly strong stance on this issue as well. The issue, though, is when it comes to the legislation, how well the different parties vote. And what is important over the coming weeks and months, as this issue is further debated and when it gets to the legislative stage, is to make sure that all politicians are feeling the weight of popular opinion on this. There's a very good example we saw just towards the end of last year on the emissions trading scheme, where a weight of popular opinion seriously shifted a debate very much at the last minute. Now, in this one, you're starting from a far easier viewpoint, in the sense that a lot of Liberals have said they're against it. The Liberal Party spokespeople have made negative noises about the idea, and it shouldn't be that hard for us to get the weight of opposition to commit to being dead set opposed to this and dead set voting against it. But you need to be communicating with my colleagues, and you need to be putting the maximum pressure on the government, because in the end, my colleagues who will help to make the decision as a party as to how we all go, they're going to want to see that there is pressure being placed on the government on this issue as well. And so that means making sure that you're communicating loud and clear with government senators and government members as well, and making sure that they're hearing there's a lot of angst, a lot of concern, a lot of opposition to this. I know that my office is happy, ready to assist, and others of my colleagues have spoken out against this proposal. Will be happy to talk to you and assist in any way they can. But please know that there are people, politicians, willing to stand up on this issue, willing to back those who want to fight it, hoping that we can work with you, and hoping that we can defeat this and ensure that the types of policies and the types of policy principles governments take in the future to the internet are ones that recognise the open flow of information that is the internet, recognise the, frankly, technological constraints that exist in terms of effectively trying to limit that, and are actually more about empowering families and individuals to make sure that they make the right usage choices for the web for themselves. So thanks everyone for coming tonight. I can't stay right till the end, so if you're doing an open panel or questions or whatever at the end, then I won't be here. But if anybody desperately wants to throw questions at me, please feel free to do so, and I apologise, but I have a 7 p.m. engagement that I have to be at too. So thanks everyone, and any questions?